audio indicator. And there's the audio indicator. Thank you so much, Kate. So as a reminder, these recordings will be on CORE Alberta at corealberta.ca. So now that we have finished our housekeeping items, I would like to take this time to briefly introduce you to the Healthy Aging Alberta initiative and the CORE Alberta platform for those who might not be familiar. So Healthy Aging Alberta is a by community for community provincial initiative that brings together a rich network of community-based organizations from across the province that are united by the vision of making Alberta one of the best places in the world to grow older. So Healthy Aging Alberta focuses on the development of a coordinated community-based senior serving sector that is respected and integrated within the broader senior system of care and can empower and inspire every senior to age how they choose, ultimately improving health and social outcomes for older adults. So there are thousands of incredible organizations in our sector, each offering critical services that support healthy and empowered aging, but we can be stronger together and have a louder voice when united. Together, we can create the bedrock for healthy aging in our province by building a network that connects the sector's organizations. Healthy Aging Alberta seeks to develop a coordinated sector by bringing together community-based organizations around a common framework for action with a focus on identifying and addressing priority areas related to healthy aging and community. The initiative seeks to create a provincial network of organizations that can advocate for healthy aging on a provincial level, share knowledge, and create functional relationships with one another and our allies in health and other sectors. So like a tapestry, we become stronger when we weave our knowledge, expertise, and passion together. United, we can create more communities where older adults are supported as they grow older in their homes, engaged in their communities, a future that we all want and benefit from. And one of the tools at our disposal to support the weaving of this network is CORE Alberta. So CORE Alberta is a sector development tool that has been developed to support the collective vision and strategic objectives of Healthy Aging Alberta. The CORE Alberta platform is a free member-based digital knowledge and learning hub designed to support provincial sector coordination and strengthening by connecting community-based senior serving organizations, to each other and their allied partners. CORE Alberta provides a digital space to share knowledge and capacity building opportunities, allowing members to find and collaborate with others with aligned mandates. So this event today is an example of creating learning opportunities that bring organizations from all over the province and how we can collectively grow together. We have over 1,000 members right now and are growing each and every day with more and more individuals like yourselves contributing to this knowledge hub. And so we want to thank you for being with us today. And so with that being said, I would like to pass it on to the Connecting People and Community for Living Well group leads to introduce themselves and share what their group is all about with everyone.
Great, thank you, Cindy. It's Helen Lightfoot here, and here's our agenda there. We'll start with our welcome, and I'll go first. So I'm Helen Lightfoot, and I'm a senior practice consultant with the Connecting People and Community for Living Well, and working on the Health Canada grant work that we will give you a little bit quick overview for in a minute there. So Sharon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sharon Hamlin, senior practice consultant, co-leading the work alongside Helen. Just thank you so much for joining today. We're really excited to have you all here. We're a provincial team, so scattered across the province. I'm south of Calgary and High River.
Maybe on to Shauna. Oh, sorry.
Good morning, everybody. This is Shauna Reed. I'm quite new to this group, but very excited to be involved. I'm the practice lead, so just sorting out how I can support this work with Helen and Sharon.
And then Kate.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Wang. I'm the project coordinator for the Connecting People and Community for Living Well grant work that's happening right now. And I'm based in Calgary.
It's Kate. And just to follow that in terms of the provincial team, I'm based out of Edmonton here. So we could go on to the next slide there. Thanks. So we just thought we'd give a quick overview of the work that we're doing. The Connecting People and Community for Living Well. Actually, I just want to back up 1 second and just say that we are so excited to be joining with Healthy Alberta Aging and the CORE platform here. It's going to be great to be part of this really significant movement that is being developed there. So our work is a Alberta Health Services provincial initiative, and we're working with rural multi-sector community teams to help them increase their capacity to support those who are affected by dementia and their carers, as well as to look at the well-being of their own community team. We have a really wide variety of partners who are part of this work. It looks a little bit different in each community, but some of the common ones are family and community support services people, the Alzheimer's Society, Alberta Health Services Home Care, Alberta Health Services Seniors Outreach, primary care network staff, and essential to the work are those with lived experience, either those who have a dementia diagnosis or someone who is caring for someone with dementia. And the how of what we're doing it and the work that's been going on in the Health Canada grant is the development of our Connecting People and Community for Living Well model. On to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of background there. This work really started in 2017, and it was termed that time as Primary Healthcare Integrated Geriatric Service Initiative, or FIGSI was the shortened version of that. And it was really work that developed in response to be proactive around that Alberta Dementia Strategy and Action Plan. There was initial work, demonstration work done 2017 to 2019. And from the learnings of that demonstration phase, it really emphasized the need to look at who are the community partners there, who are there to support people right where they live. And that's where our Health Canada grant work grew from. So currently from January 2020 to the grant ends on March 2023, it is the Connecting People and Community for Living Well work funded by Health Canada. We have 5 rural community teams that we're working with: Drumheller, Innisfail, Stony Plain, Three Hills, and Westlock. And the strong emphasis for us is that well-being focus, so that individual well-being and then also the collective well-being of the multi-sector community teams. Next slide, please. So this is the model that we have been working on and developing, and it will go on to evolve, but it has the 5 main components with the purpose of supporting well-being. The first one there being the provincial support. So that's really the grant team at this time. We're building evidence about how to support well-being and doing that advocacy and leveraging resources that are at different levels within our community and government and health services. The second component are those local communities advancing that work. They have a diverse representation, and they come with a really deep knowledge of what is happening within their communities and their local context, and a really strong sense of a common purpose there of improving people's lives. The work is led by 10 core principles that are listed there, and really impact work at all levels, whether that can be at our provincial support team, the communities, as well as when we're doing advocacy at higher levels in the system as well. Then the last 2 components, the Wellbeing Guide and the Competency Framework, are the 2 deliverables for the Health Canada grant. The Wellbeing Guide is a way for the community teams to measure and monitor the impact of their actions on the well-being of those living in their community and their own collaborative. And then the Competency Framework is to support them to understand the skills and knowledge needed to do this work and to have that impact on well-being. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we're hoping you'll be able to have a look at when you're looking on our open groups after the launch today is we have a project summary there. The model is also there, and then also the principles, which with a bit more description in them. We've got a link to our website on the AHS public facing page, and there's a video that's embedded within there. On our website, there's local stories, and so you can really hear about some of the work that has happened within local communities, as well as the pandemic response case studies. And that really exhibits how it was the local community teams that responded for people who are living within the community during that time of the restrictions. And then we've also held provincial workshops in the past, and the resources from those workshops are also listed under resources on the website. Next slide, please. And so kind of moving forward, what we will be posting on our open group is updates on our current work, any additional resources, and hoping to have some good group discussions there within the open group. Next slide, please. This launch event is also one in a series of what we're calling partners meetings that we've held for the last few years. And those are held every month, September through June, usually a 1-hour program, and we have usually a guest speaker. There's an opportunity for that education, that networking, and sharing of resources and experiences there. So if you're interested, you can, if you join our group on CORE, it will give you the opportunity to sign up for those monthly meetings, or you can contact Kate Hoang there to be on our email list. And the next slide. Great. So what we're looking forward to now is having a conversation with Dr. Norah Keating. Norah is a social gerontologist, and you can see her wealth of experience there, listed with being a professor for rural aging, the co-director of research on aging policies and practice at the U of A, extraordinary professor, I love that title, from the Northwest University in South Africa, and director of International Association on Gerontology and Geriatrics Global Social Issues on Aging. And Norah has also been a expert advisor to our group as we've been working on our Health Canada grant work. And what we're really hoping is that we will be having this discussion and conversation. Sharon and I will start with some questions, but we would love for you to put up your hand to ask a question, put it in the chat box, because we're really hoping for some back and forth during this time with it. I think I'm handing it over to Sharon now, hey?
Okay. So first of all, Norah, thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to be able to tap into your expertise and have the opportunity for those who are advancing this type of work in their community, be able to pick your brain a little bit about what you see. So as Helen said, you've been in addition to an extraordinary professor, you've been an expert advisor on our connecting people and community for living well work. And just, we had the opportunity to connect last week about this, and it's a really fun opportunity to be able to reflect on the journey of this connecting people and community for living well work. And it has to be said how grateful we are to our dear colleague, Charlene Knudsen, who really was instrumental in the idea around this work, and certainly happening upon you in the halls of the University of Alberta back in, I'm going to say it was probably around September of 2018, where she was up working on her PhD studies and ran into you, and you asked, as you are curious, what are you working on? And so she was telling you a little bit about this work, and you were kind enough then at that point to provide a letter of support as we were applying for our current Health Canada grant. And I just wonder, Norah, what was it about this work that was enticing to you to become involved and to stay involved?
It's great to be here, Sharon, and just a little backdrop to that question. I spent pretty much my entire academic career in Alberta, and came to Alberta with a particular interest in communities and how people aged in those communities. So it's a long-standing interest of mine. And I just got to do one more caveat on the extraordinary professor thing. And that's how it's pronounced. It's not extraordinary, which I like. It's extraordinary, meaning unpaid, but we're happy to have you along. So, but with Charlene, I mean, it was just a natural. One is that she was a very compelling and energetic person. So those of you who knew Charlene know that you couldn't say no to her. But the thing that I thought was actually extraordinary about Charlene was she was passionate about communities, and communities as the places where people lived. And that well-being of older people really, to a great extent, was dependent on those places where they lived and the people in those places. And that to me is very much part of my belief. There are lots of things that are about aging that are important, including health and health care. But when we think about lives of people as they grow older, it's those places where they live. So it was easy for me when I saw her wanting to develop something that really, she would love to see this now, that has turned into a province-wide set of experiences and work around how do we think about and really do better in supporting people as they're growing older in our communities. It was a natural. So it's just been a wonderful journey for me. Well, not always wonderful. There have been a few up and downs, but a great journey for me in terms of seeing how this project has been developed and seeing how it resonates, I think, in work that's going on in other parts of the world as well. And that's the part where I'm really fortunate because I'm connected to people, not only in Alberta, but in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I think, you know, certainly your work in that global space, you bring back to us things that you're hearing across the world, and certainly, you know, those kind of seminal documents, the Decade on Healthy Aging that's within the United Nations right now. When I read those kinds of things, I think of the communities that we work with, right, and how what they're doing locally really is. I see that in those documents. So can you talk a little bit more, Norah, about you're familiar with some of the things that these teams are doing here. How do you see that in that global space, kind of tying back to this work in Alberta?
Well, there are lots of parts of this global space, of course, but one of the things I did early pandemic, as I wasn't really traveling as any more than anyone else, was to think about how we really move forward global agendas when we're not with one another. And one of the things I did, is we don't often do, is I took the time to read some of those documents right from the beginning of the UN Charter of Nations down to some of the specific things that we're seeing right now that are about aging. And there's some things I see in those that I think map on very well to what we're trying to do. What I guess surprised me about those documents as I read them is that they had a very strong values agenda. And those values are about things like respect for human rights, that people really are all equal. A value placed on social justice and some ideas about what is just and fair and what is not, and how do you make up for those gaps. And ideas of well-being that were there right from the very beginning of those documents. And so we see those in documents that follow. Those were all in the UN Charter. If you fast forward to 2015, there was a lot going on during that decade. One of which were these big sustainable development goals. And they were mostly big ones about climate and about natural environment and so on. But they too had a well-being for primarily for nations, but also for communities agenda. They had the clean water and air agendas particularly, but also well-being of people. But it wasn't really until that 2015 document, which was the World Report on Aging and Health, that we started to talk about older people. Older people were sort of vaguely mentioned up to there, but they were vulnerable. They were put in with these groups of people who were very vulnerable, refugees, groups that had been displaced, and older people. And vulnerability's got some advantages, but it also, I think, has not necessarily served us well. Because if people were vulnerable, then there's a sense that you need to protect and maybe set them aside And we saw that during early COVID, where we protected people, particularly in care homes, I think with best intentions, and did some things really that were quite terrible in the end, which is isolating and disconnecting and increasing loneliness. So the World Report on Aging and Health came along, and it's called Aging and Health, mostly because it comes from the World Health Organization. But if you really read the fine print, it's about well-being. And it's about that fit between who the person is and what they want and what their values are, and the environments where they live. One of which, of course, is that physical setting that we call community. And so that report, and then things that have followed, have been focused on environments of aging. Or at least that's the language I use. And it is part of those documents. So that World Report was based in the idea that as people go along their life course, they become more or less advantaged. Right from early on, those kinds of transitions that happen in people's lives make for huge diversity later on. And that's where you get these inequalities that we like to try to address. That some of these environments are particularly important. And I think one of the things to me that's really been important is that all of these documents, the people that are signing them are governments. They're the members of this club, of the United Nations Club. It's a club of nations, some, I don't know, 164 nations who have signed on to these declarations and agendas. And that's where I think we as citizens of any country can hold our governments accountable. Because there's a lot of slippage, as we know, between what a government signs on to and what actually happens on the ground. But they're the club, they're the group. And so when the United Nations signs on to a declaration that says we've got a decade right now, from 2021 to 2030, where our goal is to include everyone, to leave no older people behind, and to increase well-being, I think that comes right back around to what we're trying to do in Alberta. So it's really very exciting. The progress has been different across nations and within nations, but there's progress being made, I believe, and people can't not see aging now. They may not know what to do about it, but they really are seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, I think we hear that from the local teams also, right? Within their own communities, and there's often a higher percentage of their population, and so they're seeing things, or the towns and municipalities are putting some things in place to meet some of those needs, as well as desires of what people are saying they want to have within their community. One of the things I was wondering about, Norah, is when you were talking about well-being, how are other countries starting to put some of those well-being ideas into place? Are you seeing examples of that in other areas of the world?
Yes. Of course, the whole idea of well-being is somewhat contested, Helen, but I'm seeing work in well-being in two different areas in particular. One is this whole area of what we call material well-being. So there's work being done around the world on things like housing for older people. And we see this in areas where there's endemic poverty, where just basic housing and amenities is something that's being focused on. We see it in more affluent nations where we're thinking about how can we build, and I see it in Western Europe, I see it in Canada and the US, how can we create housing for different groups of older people who have different needs and desires, you know, from single family homes to condo developments to care facilities of various sorts. We do better or not so well on some of those, but those are big agendas around well-being, around material well-being. Another big piece is, you know, in material well-being is income security. And there's a lot of conversation going on in different parts of the world about things like universal pensions and who gets those and at what level are they funded, and do governments have an obligation, for example, to make sure that older people have a sufficient pension that they can meet their basic needs. One of the conversations that's going on in Southern Africa right now, many countries there have universal pensions. What they're finding is that often an older person, we think often very positively about multi-generation households where people live. Often what happens in countries in Southern Africa is the only person in a multi-generation household who has any income is that older person. And so they are having to try to support everything from children's school fees to feeding a household of people. And none of these tiny pensions are adequate to do that. So another piece of material well-being is income security. They're looking a lot at pension schemes and employment in Europe and thinking about age in which people might be eligible for a pension. So those are two big pieces. Health, of course, and how we support health and deal with chronic conditions that are age-related is another major one around material well-being. And we're doing more or less well on those agendas. We look across Canada at things like how we're doing with our acute healthcare and long-term care systems. And I would say we're getting about a B- in many parts of the country. But those are things that are happening in different places. There's different emphasis on different ones of those, depending on where people are living.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to Cindy, your introductory information around the CORE platform and some of the language.
Excuse me, I hate to do this to you, but somebody's just walked into my back door. I will be right back.
Oh,
no.
Oh my goodness. Forgot the do not disturb sign. Yeah. Live on Zoom.
Yeah, live on Zoom. I'm just looking, Shauna, at your question.
Yeah, we'll make sure we ask her there, Shauna.
Sorry?
We'll make sure when Nora's
Yes.
back, we can let her know about
Sure.
the question in the chat.
My apology, all is well.
Okay,
Very
good.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Helen or Sharon, my apology.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just thinking back to Cindy's introduction, and the words that stuck out to me are coordinated, common framework, provincial network, advocacy. You know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, as you're describing those material things, when we think of kind of the siloed nature, I guess, of how we as residents of the province, of the country, receive services, right? They're very different. And I see this work as crossing some of those boundaries. And what we are so excited about with the CORE platform is that coordination, that voice that brings to light some of the issues then that are happening, as well as a place to celebrate the excellent work and the achievements that are being made locally. Shauna, you've popped a question into the chat box. Did you want to speak to that?
Oh, sure. Nora, I'm just wondering if in your adventures, so how almost every culture cares for their older adults in a different way and has a different perspective and a different attitude as to their value and wisdom or burden, just different perspectives. And I'm just wondering if you have come across a perspective or a model or an attitude of caring for older people that you see as a gold standard or a best kind of approach.
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly one that's of real interest to me because a lot of my own research has been on family care. I just finished well, I would say that what we think is that many of the cultures that are not ours do better. That this idea in Asia of filial piety, that one must venerate and take care of older people, the ideas in Southern Africa around large extended families that live with and support their older adults. Those are often our kind of models that we hold up. And I think we're quite hard on ourselves. As I've spent a lot of years studying, understanding families and aging, what I see in all of those is that what older people most value is having choices about the way in which they're engaged with their family members. So I would say, and it's really counterintuitive, that the places that are doing the best are some of the countries in Western Europe, Germany, Norway, Sweden, where they have quite high levels of services, income security services, housing services. So they remove the obligation that, as one person said to me, I don't know whether my daughter's coming over to check the fridge to make sure I've got food and make sure I'm doing what I should, or to sit with me and talk and have a cup of tea and enjoy my company. And the work that's going on around family models at the government level is primarily in Europe. And what's going on there is they're looking at the ways in which governments, the extent to which governments are supporting families in things like caring for their older members. And so they use this term familism. And what they're talking about is if families are left pretty much on their own to do all the care, governments stand back and say, good for you, we're happy that you do that. Those often are places where people struggle because it's pretty hard to do everything for one another. We don't expect families to do all the education of young children. Should we expect them to do all the care of older members? Models that have what they call supported familism, so good income security, good housing options, community support, and generally older people and family members are happier with their relationships and about their situation. So we've learned quite a lot about those. I would say that those kinds of supported familism models are pretty good ones, and there are lots of examples of those. Particularly, we see them across Europe because that's where they've done this work. So that's not a specific one, but that's generally the approach that, in my view, is the best one.
Yeah, thank you, Norah.
Mm-hmm.
It really aligns with, that the person-centered and family-centered care, right? That is part of the action items for the decade of aging too, right? That
Mhm.
and addressing those addressing the material needs, and so then that supports that relational connection that people have within
It
their
does, Helen.
families.
It's interesting when you read these documents. Whoever thought they'd be interesting, but they actually are. Um, the World Report on the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging has action items that governments are supposed to take, and one of them. There are only 4. One of them is that communities should support older people, but the other one that you're referring to is that governments, countries should have systems of long-term care. And there's a little piece in that whole action item that says families should not be held responsible for care. And that's surprising, given that these are action items that all these countries signed on to. And the piece around communities that I think is going to be interesting to ask some of you about is there's also a tiny little line in there that says communities should support older people to the extent they are able. And to me, that's a really big one. Because I love these coalitions that are going on. I love the work you're doing. I worry that community organizations run out of steam because in many communities, there simply isn't the capacity to be doing all these things. Or you need to count on a provincial government or a federal government in order to provide some of those services like access to healthcare that communities don't have control over.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out what's reasonable for us to do as communities and where it's simply not feasible or reasonable, and how that varies across a province like Alberta. Because we know for sure, and among the people in the project, huge differences in community resources.
Yeah, for sure. Barb, that's a great question in the chat box you've posed there. Do you want to speak to that, Barb Scully?
Hi, Nora. I was just wondering, how do we really mobilize municipal government, especially in rural? We talk a lot about provincial and federal, but how do we make the municipal level really be the champions for this work and help push that up while supporting community? Because we're asking them to wear 2 hats to advocate on both sides.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I think all roads are leading to municipal governments right now. One of the things that I'd recommend, it is very practical. The Statistics Canada has just released their demographic report from the census, and what that means is that every community, you can get a profile of your community if you go onto the Statistics Canada website. And it will show you the proportion of people in the community, like it will give you the age distribution in your community. So I did that for Summerland, where I live in the Okanagan. And here, 31% of people in the community are over age 65. We also know that older people tend to vote at much higher levels than younger people. So one little encouragement is to send this information off to your mayor and say, or give it to your mayor and say, isn't this great? Aren't you lucky? You've got a bunch of engaged people who are going to vote. Let's work together on services. So it's a little one, but it's a practical one. I think what's happening, I know what's happening as well, is that a lot of municipalities are saying so much has been downloaded onto us and that we have limited capacity. So I think if you can catch the attention of municipal councils and mayors, that then you can be practical about what are the things that would make a difference, whether they're housing developments or community-based services. You're already doing a lot with the voluntary sector. You know, what little bit would it take to make a big, real and visible difference and to older people in the community. So knowing your demographic profile, knowing what the priorities are in your community, being realistic about the capacities in your community, and then where is it that a municipality might intervene to do a bit better, or to top things up just enough that they'll get elected again next time.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think a follow-up action I've written down here is to confirm we have the right hyperlink for that, and we can send that out to the within the meeting materials so that people can look up their own profiles for their communities. Yeah, that's a great resource, Norah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
I think I just wanted to step back a little bit when you had talked about that systems for long-term care. And you know, that language, we hear long-term care and go kind of to that facility end of things. And just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what is meant by that systems of long-term care.
Well, it means different things, of course, Helen, in different parts of the world. It means for family, voluntary, and formal systems of support to older people with chronic conditions who need support. Where those occur and who provides them becomes the question. So we got different settings in which that support might occur. We've got different people who might provide it. One of the projects that we're working on right now is with Statistics Canada. And we're putting together a report that I hope will be out soon called the Care Economy. And it's about who are the people in Canada who are providing support to older adults and others with long-term health problems. And what do we know about what they're doing, how much they're doing, who's getting paid for what, and where it's coming from. It turns out that we don't know the answer to most of those things in Canada because we have no way of looking across family, voluntary sector, and paid workers. In our system, now we're talking economic systems in Canada, anybody who's paid to do care gets counted on things like labor force surveys and so on. Anyone who is a family member or a neighbor who does care support gets counted on things like Statistics Canada surveys on caregiving. Voluntary sector, now you tell me, I don't think it gets counted much at all. We've not been able to really think about how you might measure across the country what it is that's going on in the voluntary sector and who's doing it, and how much are they doing. So there's a lot we don't know. I mean, we've got these debates about whether we're building bricks and mortar, long-term care facilities, or whether we can provide care to people at home or in other settings. There's some more fundamental questions that we haven't asked yet. But fortunately, Statistics Canada is onto it, and what will be in this report is how we're going to do this. How are we going to measure this stuff? And I would love to hear from any of you about that voluntary sector piece, because it's missing. We simply don't have it. Actually, we have very little about care workers either. Like, we don't know. We know how much family members are providing, what they're doing, who they're doing it for. We don't know this. We don't have the same information for care workers who might be hired by home care, or might be working in a facility, or might be hired privately. We cannot put that together. So there's some big gaping holes in our ability to answer your question, and we're trying to fill them. Yeah.
And then to plan, right? If you don't actually know what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see
And it
some
was-
people are making comments. I'm not following them all, but I hope we can capture those because
Yes.
it
Yeah.
really will help. Seriously, I'm meeting with the StatCan people later today. And so I would be happy to report to them anything that you can help me with.
Yeah.
Well, and we know that that's such an important part of what supports well-being is people's ability to continue on in that volunteer sector in some way, shape, or form, right? You know, we heard that across the persons living with dementia, the carers, and those that are involved in the collaboratives, like to be able to meaningfully be involved and to have an impact locally. That's regardless of your diagnosis or role, right? So important to be able to catch that, measure that. What are the, it's that.
And to be taken seriously, Sharon.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that making the invisible visible, right? Yeah, for sure.
I just was seeing there from Lisa Bouchard about that this would be such valuable information to have, and just wondering, Lisa, or anybody else who's out there, what ways are you reporting now, and even just to put them in the chat box, like where does your information go? Because we all know if you're getting funding from somewhere, you have to report it back. And so what would be some of the ways that information, you know, how does it exist already to be able to capture any information on that?
Did you want me to just chime in? Okay.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
So in regards to our organization, we do track all of the volunteer hours. And so we do report that back to funders, but there's no, I guess, central place to kind of report that. And as Dr. Keating was speaking, I was trying to think back to when I would have filled out the last census report for our family. And is there like a question on there about, you know, do you volunteer or anything? No. And so, you know, if there was kind of a, do you volunteer, you know, how many hours do you give per week, per month, or something where people could estimate. And even if there was, I guess, categories where people could check off where they, you know, if it's child and family service type of stuff, or, you know, older adult, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that could potentially be a start, because it's right, making the invisible visible. How many hours are given back, you know, under this, I guess, you know, people talk about civil society and just this like, yeah, invisible workforce that we do have going, and it's huge and it's so important. And it's very interesting to me because our organization runs heavily on that invisible workforce, and we don't feel that it is valued for sure from anyone kind of up here making those decisions. So this is great, very interesting, and, you know, thank you for sharing.
Well, and it's really helpful to me because we've had that piece sitting in this report about how, you know, how do we get those data? And these comments are really helpful to me because we've got all the questions to ask. What are you doing? And, you know, what kind of tasks and how many? We know how to ask the questions. We've just never captured the volunteer sector. So I don't know. That's a question. I simply have not seen those data. So even knowing what we need to know and from whom. We've got surveys on caregiving, for example. There's no reason we couldn't ask those same questions of people. I don't think there's any reason. I'm sure Statistics Canada would have a reason, but anyway, why we couldn't ask. So this is really helpful.
It would debunk that myth that this kind of work just happens in the community, right? It just happens. People get together and beautiful things happen, which is true, but it's not without effort or intention. And to bring that voice, I think that's beautiful.
I just see Karen. Sorry, I just see Karen. You have your hand up there, Karen Cockrell.
Hi, Norah. My name is Karen, and I'm the project manager for the Community-Based Innovations in Dementia Care project. that Helen was on, and now she's on to bigger and better things. But Abram's online, and yeah, and so is Shauna. So when I first became involved in this project, my dad was just diagnosed with dementia, and that was a couple of years ago, and he's quite advanced now. My experience with care facilities is quite negative. We don't have enough people in these facilities to provide good care, and I'm looking for ways to try to make a difference in the province, you know, to advocate for seniors with dementia. We have had to, and you know, we're really lucky because my dad sold his house and he's got some money to pay for extra help. And we have somebody, we have a companion coming in for 10 hours a day now because he cannot be alone. And the staff there just, you know, can't provide the care that he needs, which is, and you know, he had an opportunity to move to a different care facility that actually told us, no, you cannot bring a companion here. And I don't trust these places to provide the care that is required. And I'm just I really want to, you know, make a difference. And I don't know what kind of advice. I mean, I've had people tell me that it's the provincial government that's been in, it's the same party that's been in, you know, for the last 40 years, you know, and we need to make a change that way. But yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a huge one, Karen. And I'm, you know, I'm personally very sympathetic because I went through the same journey with my dad. So I did very much the same thing you were doing. But you know, we have options, which most people don't, and even then, it's not good. So I would say several things. So one is this pointing out that we don't know what's going on. We know that in terms of care facilities, one of the things COVID shows us is we know very little about what's happening in care facilities. The reporting structures are very different for public and private ones. So there are agendas around forcing those to be more open, so we have some reporting going on. This project with Statistics Canada is one where we're going to reveal how little we know about what's happening. Then at the next level up, which is where I've been working, is that we're trying to, you know, there's this fine line between public embarrassment and finally getting governments on board with human rights and dignity and the kinds of things that we want. And we're starting to see things like ministerial conferences. So next month, I'm invited to a meeting in Rome, sponsored by an organization called the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And their entire job is to bring senior cabinet ministers from across the EU together to talk about big issues, and this meeting is about issues of aging. So there are going to be representatives from 50 plus countries and at this meeting. And two things. One is that Canada and the US are always invited, and Canada's Minister of State for Seniors is going to be at that meeting. The second one is that I get to have the podium for the first opening plenary panel of ministers from different countries, and I will be able to say something about Canada. But the third thing is that organization is going to release a document about what are the agendas that they're going to be working on over the next few years. That document can and should be brought home to Canada to say, okay, so what are we doing here? I think in some ways we're at a real disadvantage in that we're so lonely here on this great big continent. It really is useful to be in a forum like the Africa Union or the European Union when you got a whole bunch of countries, because then you can even set up a little bit of competition to say, okay, how are you doing? Who's the model here for doing things well? So I'm trying to make a difference at that level. I've written to the office of our Minister of State for Seniors to say I'm there to brief her and support her and introduce her at the meetings. So we'll try to get that set and stay in place. Political machinations in Alberta, I have a little less control over, so I will leave it to all of you to work that out. But it really, it says a lot about where we put our resources, what we value most. These are the social justice agendas that are hard ones to pin down, but really important ones, it seems to me, around valuing human rights, around valuing people's lives, around valuing all people's lives. So I've been on this mission for a while, and I will continue to do this as long as I'm invited into these kinds of meetings.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's such an important thing to be able to translate that local to inform the policy level, which I think, Norah, certainly your experience has been at that policy level as well. You know, what we're hoping to learn and be able to demonstrate within the context of this Health Canada grant work. And I know, Karen, you spoke of the CIDC grants as well, but it's what are those things that can be done locally? What are those things that can't be done locally that we can then say, hey, this isn't, we can't do this here without policy change or system level barriers really being removed. But you know, you mentioned earlier how it can be exhausting for those local community teams, right? In absence of operational funding or some kind of policy level support to sustain that locally.
I think that's really important, Sharon. I haven't seen, well, I've just finished a project that was set in Latin America and Central, Eastern, Southern, Western Africa on what are the resources that communities have or need to have to support well-being of older adults. And there are differences in the details, but one of the things that comes out really strongly is there are some things over which communities have no control. Like in these communities in Latin America, which are in the high mountains, the infrastructure, as in roads, for example, to get to external services are not there, and communities can't manage those. The state needs to manage those. So there are all kinds of those examples, and that had never struck me in quite that way. You know, communities should be supportive to the older adults who live there. Well, that sounds great, but where really can you do this? What can't you do? And really delineating those would be, I think, a huge contribution, because now we have a sense of what that looks like in the global south. We don't have the parallel for our part of the world.
It does really make me think of, you know, Healthy Aging Alberta and CORE, because this is where people are coming together and starting to have these conversations. And so how can that, you know, how can this type of platform be able to gather some of that information or inform how Stats Canada gathers it to, you know, it's right in the forming stages of this, but I see just great potential for that, how those meeting places are being set up now.
Well, and you're in the position to do this. You're there, you're in communities, you know what's feasible and what's not. And I think across the communities that have been part of this project, there are some who found it tougher than others. And how much does that have to do with what are the resources within the community and what are the things outside that may end up being barriers? That's really crucial information. I've seen too many skilled groups of people put a huge amount of time and energy into projects and then just run out of steam. And we don't want to be doing that anymore.
Yeah.
So that might be one way as part of this whole set of things we can do that could begin to build the case for here's what's needed, or here's what's needed in this community. This work we just finished, there was a lot of discussion about culture and traditions in communities, particularly around Indigenous peoples and languages and ways of doing things that often weren't supported within communities. Languages weren't, people couldn't get services in their language, their traditional language, or there were foods or medicines that just weren't seen as useful. So, when we think about some of our own First Nations communities or communities that have been settled to a great extent by people from other cultural backgrounds, that's a whole other piece that I would think many of you are highly experienced in understanding.
Yes. Just reading some of the comments in here.
Yeah, there's some great feedback here. Yvonne, you mentioned the social return on investment, and that's going back to that data. I think that's such an important piece because when we look at that kind of community-based services and that healthy aging platform, it is that social return that we're interested in. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in. Linda was sharing around her experience in volunteering and just how time consuming that can be, but also rewarding, right? To be able to be supportive. So thank you for that, Linda. Lauren, Lauren, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that question. I think it's a great thing to dive into.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little long-winded. I just had some thoughts going on as you were speaking and more questions came to my head. But I'm just wondering, you talk about, other countries when you're there, the work that they have going on. So when you visit other places, like I think it's important to celebrate the wins, even if they're small wins, and be proud and speak about them. So I'm just curious, when you go and visit other places, do you see anything about the work being done in Alberta? Do you talk about any big wins that we have or anything that you think we're doing well? I'm just curious your opinion on that.
Well, you have to understand that I haven't been anywhere in 2 years much. So, but given that, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. So when I'm going to this meeting in Rome next month, the European Union has this consortium of civil society organizations that I know Sharon and Helen know about, called Age Platform. It's called Age Platform Europe. It's very much the kind of thing that you're talking about, where civil society organizations, volunteer organizations of various sorts come together. They're all doing work in aging. And so what I can do when I go to that meeting is talk about what's going on in Alberta and how, because there's strength in exactly what you're doing when you've got a whole group of people who are working together, and they've been in this business a bit longer in Europe. And what they are doing now is they're influencing policy. So they're coming out from this age platform group with pronouncements about issues like pensions and long-term care and things that together they believe need to be changed or can be supported and in these ways. So to then be able to say, we're doing similar things here, and these are the directions we're taking. And these are the special challenges we've got in Canada with huge distances and low population densities. It's not the same kind of challenge. In fact, I think you should be sending a delegation off to Australia to talk to them about some of these kinds of issues, because that's a country that has it's very parallel in terms of its geography, with some very harsh climates, low population densities, certainly rural areas that are very scattered. So there's a place of connection that I really think when you get that next big Health Canada grant, just add on a chunk of money for a delegation to go to Australia and go in January or February.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, really,
Well,
you might as well. Yeah.
we're always dreaming of.
Yeah, so I will, and it's these kinds of meetings that really help me, and anything that can come from your consortium around what volunteer organizations are doing, who they are, because I don't think we even know, who are the volunteer organizations that are doing this work.
Yeah.
It's amazing how long we've worked in this space and how little the province, let alone the world, knows about it. So I'm happy to be an ambassador as I connect with people.
Yeah, that's great. Chelsea brings up a great point here in the chat box as well. Chelsea, are you wanting to speak to that? It leans right into Norah, what you were just saying, right?
Yeah, hi there. Great presentation, Norah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying, in my local community that I work in Lacombe, I'm a nurse in the community. I've noticed a lot of support coming from churches, from church groups, and family as well. And the partnerships in organizations, like in health and social organizations, I think helps a lot. But I would say the majority of it still, from what I've noticed, comes from family and like the non-organizational groups like churches.
Yeah, and churches, not around the world, but in many regions of the world, often are the major supporters of people who are vulnerable, people who are homeless, people who are older and don't have other supports. And in some parts of the world, I see multi-faith organizations that have come together across a country or across a region to work together on some of these issues. There really is quite a lot of impact to be had in groups coming together. So yes, I agree that churches often are one of the big players in many parts of the world.
Yeah, we certainly hear that from the collaboratives involved in this Health Canada work, that's one of those kind of peripheral organizations that they tap into, right? That kind of cross faith organizations in the communities, because they are a real lifeline for people, for sure. Alex, I see you have a comment in there around Latin America. Did you want to say something in addition to that?
Sure. I came from Latin America, so I can kind of speak from that context. I also work with senior population back there. The social presumption in general is that the family is the main responsible to take care of the senior, their necessities or whatever they need for, and that society and state are in a second plan. Like, they need to build facilities, they need to build infrastructure, but like they don't see or they don't have in their agendas the senior population as one of the critical stakeholders, because there is an assumption that families have to do that. I don't say that that's correct, but that's how the society behaves in Latin America.
Yeah, and that's really, that's a very good point, Alex. We see the same thing in other parts of the world. We've just finished a a project on beliefs about family responsibility in Latin America and Southern Africa. And we see this very strong theme about family responsibility across both regions. What happens, and I know what happens more with governments in Southern Africa than I do in Latin America, but what happens then is that I don't know which comes first. This strong sense of beliefs about family responsibility comes in part from lack of alternatives. I mean, there are no other options. And the options that are available are often very poor quality. And so part of this work on beliefs that we found is that families generally hold that belief very strongly. They believe that there are no other options for them. They provide some discretion on the part of family members who have lived in situations of abuse or neglect by parents or long-term trauma. But mostly families are doing their best to cope. It does not mean that we shouldn't expect some support for that. So there's a strong familist culture. It doesn't mean we should not expect that families get some support for this work that they're doing. And I think that's the challenge for governments across the region. You might be interested, Alex, in knowing that the new secretariat and president for the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics is in Buenos Aires. And so the incoming president, who's from there, has set as his major agenda issues of aging and particularly issues of care in the global south. So you're going to be hearing a lot more, I think, about those kinds of questions and other issues.
Thanks for your comment, Alex.
Yeah, Sharon's just said something. I saw her comment about people may not have families to support them. As a person who does family research, one of the things that we know very little about is the family histories of older adults. So whether or not you have children is one thing, but if you've had 2 or 3 partners over your life course, and you have children and stepchildren and some that you're close to and some that you're not, we just can't count up how many people who might be in that younger generation when you get to be 90 and say, you're good to go, you got 6 of them. We need to know more about all of those, exactly, families by blood, families by choice, families by no choice, Shauna, as well. And who really, among these different kind of family trajectories, what do we know about the connections between and among people? And of course, there's a lot of more and more care happening by older people to people who may have lifelong disabilities. We've done much better in recent years with our acute care system in helping people survive at birth, helping people survive childhood or adolescent or young adult traumas. And so in our work, we're seeing people who are lifelong carers for children and facing, when they get to be 80 or 90 years old, difficult questions about who's going to take over that care because I can't do it any longer. So there are lots of family care questions that we still have to address. And I do think that one more category, Shauna, families by blood, families by choice, and really families by maybe no choice is a bit crass, but really people are put together in ways that perhaps they shouldn't be.
Or necessity even.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a better way to frame it.
So I'm just looking at the time. We have about 10 minutes. We do need a few minutes for wrap up, but I'm wondering, Norah, as you venture off into the spaces that you go, are there some burning questions that you might have for people on the line who are involved in this kind of work in communities?
Yes, now that I've got you all here. One of the big ones for me is, in your experience, what is it that the voluntary sector within communities can achieve, and what are the barriers to achieving it in supporting well-being of older people? I would really like to know that. It's another one of those things, I think, kind of like families all care for their older people. Small rural communities are, you know, everybody knows one another and we all support one another. And it's also lovely, Sharon, as you said early on. And my sense is it's not always so lovely. So any insight you'd have, I appreciate it.
See, Chelsea's got her hand up there. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Yeah, I would say the barriers I've noticed, of course, to the church groups is that you have to be religious or belong to a church. And that the volunteers that work through the churches, I find it to be an extremely efficient way to support older adults, but that, you know, it's not accessible to everyone for that reason. Volunteers through the organizations, barriers I find to that is that there's too much red tape involved in regards to liability. And that, I think, is an issue that a lot of organizations run into, unfortunately.
An expense, I would think too, Chelsea, hey, like that starts to, for the organization that's trying to, as a voluntary organization, trying to support those volunteers, that adds expense to them around that risk mitigation, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially for individuals with dementia or who are more vulnerable, organizations are hesitant to maybe send volunteers in there because the person is so vulnerable. But it's a little bit of a catch-22 because the thing that would make them less vulnerable would be having more support.
Yeah. I think you raised two really interesting points, Chelsea. One is that there is exclusion in rural communities. You know, your point about the churches, like who's worthy of support and who gets excluded. And that's one that really does need to address, because often those who are most on the fringes stay there because of those sorts of reasons. So that's a big one. The liability one really has got between liability and privacy. I think those two have really got us quite bound up. I had a few years ago a wonderful experience in a little community in Northern Ontario, where they were doing amazing things. And so the person who was the manager of the local little grocery store noticed when people were, you know, when the husband was coming in instead of the wife, or when the person wasn't buying very much, or when they were having difficulty making choices in the grocery store. And that manager of the grocery store knew the people who were running the community. It was like a Meals on Wheels organization. Well, he absolutely should not, in terms of privacy, have called up the person running the Meals on Wheels and said, you know, I think this couple may be in difficulty. Or the RCMP, who were alerted to notice that people were not driving well or were walking in the cold, and would take them home or would do things that were very kind rather than stopping and, you know, and worrying people. All of that stuff, when I asked people about that, they said, you know, it's a long way to the provincial capital, or it's a long way to where the health unit is organized, and we just carry on.
Mhm.
So I recognize if we could take down those barriers, how much more could be done. So it's that, yes, it's that working together, being able to work together in ways that break the rules, and maybe we need to change the rules a bit.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, I
Linda's-
agree.
Linda has a comment in there around the volunteers and sometimes the dwindling presence of volunteers that can absolutely impact that. So true. Liza brings up here around the lack of core operational funding, that project-based funding, right, for new projects rather than supporting things that are already established. And certainly that has come clear here within the research for this work is the grant periods, right? So you have a 1-year grant. It's difficult to make something that's sustainable when there's a cold hard cutoff, right?
Well, and I think
so true.
The whole issue about what do we expect of volunteers and why can't we recruit? Why can't we recruit? Is it just too thankless, too hard, too long? There's no exit strategy. Like once you're a volunteer, you never get to resign. What is it about? I mean, there's a whole piece there. You see, with family members, you know, your ability to resign is pretty limited. With volunteers, maybe sanctions aren't so powerful. But you know, why? It's sort of like, why would somebody work as a care aide when the pay is awful and the benefits are terrible and the working conditions are hard? A lot of these working conditions in that sense for volunteers and for family members are hard too. So how do we make those things better so that it's a satisfying thing to do? That's where the well-being of the coalitions piece I think is really important, Sharon. We can only do this through sheer altruism for so long. There's got to be a sense that I'm doing something that's important, or we are.
Yeah, for sure. Just one more comment there from Sharon Cornelius around the education of volunteers to be comfortable when working with individuals living with dementia. Sometimes the little things are huge to the care partner, taking them for a walk. So it's bringing that awareness and education availability. Oh yeah, Shauna, that's a big one. Societal concerns, not knowing our neighbors. That's that community part, right? It does make me wonder, Norah, if the person who came into your house, you must have an open door policy of some sort in your community. Which
there you go.
Be a good,
there you go. Small
community.
Small communities. It was all fine, and
that's right.
But you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't know to what extent COVID has not exactly connected people. Now, this is a very personal example, but in my small community, which is Summerland, it's very rural. And one of the things I've been doing in my being grounded here for the last 2.5 years is I do a lot of walking. And there's a rural road between here and town, and I know every one of my neighbors and all of their dogs. And so in a way, not in a way, I have really gotten more connected to my neighbors than I ever would have done. I have no idea whether that's something that's happened elsewhere or whether we could capitalize on it. But I doubt that I'm the only one.
No, that's
rural
right.
Communities are better. With urban ones, people were really, really confined and not out because it was too risky.
Some of the things that happened in urban areas, though, were, you know, some of the traffic lanes were blocked off so people could be walking at a distance and things like that. And so you did see way more people within your neighborhood walking that you didn't see before, right? So I think some of that happened too.
Well, Norah, I can't believe here we are at 1 minute before our wrap up, but just wanting to thank you so much for your time this morning. What a wonderful conversation. There are notes from people who are needing to step out for another meeting, but thank you for this. And I believe, Cindy, when the information comes out afterwards, Norah's contact information or email address will be in there. So you just never know what types of pearls people might share with you, Norah, to carry on into the world.
Well, I love that, Sharon. And just so you all know, I'll be dropping in for coffee sometime over the next little while. So
awesome.
I just
Love
take it black. I just take it black. So it's really quite simple.
Okay, that's good.
We should be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Norah.
Awesome. So thank you, everyone. As we're just heading towards our wrap up here, we would love to invite everyone to join CORE Alberta if you haven't already. And once you've joined and made an account, you can join this group. So I'm leaving the link in the chat box. So once you pop onto CORE, you can just check out the group, and just want you to pay attention to this little join button. Once you click that, done, you're part of the group. So very quick and easy. And thank you so much once again for joining us. We really appreciate everyone's valuable contributions and dialogue today, and would love to invite you to fill out our event survey. Tech support has put it in the chat, which is basically me on the other end. But this will really help us understand what you enjoyed about today's event and how we can improve in the future. As mentioned before, we would love to have you join this group in their June partners meeting. I will leave it in the chat if you're interested in signing up. And if you have any questions or any inquiries, please feel free to connect with us directly at this following email address. And I believe that is all for now. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope to see you at future events.
Yeah, thanks for joining the launch.
Cindy.
And yeah, thank you for your team's support, Cindy. It's